a recording notification so that you can consent to that. All right, I'll go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are very excited to have our next speaker talking about oak wilt disease. And I will go ahead and hand it off to you. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me today. My name is Yorkinoy. I am almost finalizing my PhD in applied math at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities. I ended up minoring in ecology because I was a little interested all these ecological phenomena. And this is one of the projects I worked with some of the people from the ecology department. So I'm really excited to share a little bit about oak wilt disease and how species diversity plays a role in that. So I guess a very natural question would be I didn't know about oak wilt disease until I started studying about it. So actually, oak wilt disease has been one of the biggest challenges in Eastern United States. I'm going to show you a map in a bit. But what it is it's a fungal disease. It turns out almost all oak species are susceptible to the disease. And you can see like on the picture, the top one, it's not the fall season because there's some green leaves around the trees. And this tree has the discoloring or the yellow colors. So this is a disease affected by the oak wilts. What happens usually is if it's a red oak, within the weeks, those leaves drop, tree dies, maybe up until 1 year. That what the pathogen does is essentially blocks the water and nutrition conducting system of the tree, so it cannot get the food, water, and it eventually dies. And since it's a disease, I guess maybe next natural question, how does the disease spread from if one tree is affected, how does it spread to the other one? And two primary ways of this disease spreads. One we call is overland via beetles. So once this is a disease tree on the left, I hope you can see my mouse moving around. Then it creates the fungal mats. The sap beetles, there I think the two beetles were identified who usually carry the disease. They get the pathogen and they carry, and usually the wounded trees. Maybe there was a storm, and that's why like now they have regulations about pruning. They ended up landing and infecting the healthy tree. But the majority spread, actually, you can see the picture below here, happens through the below ground root grafts. It turns out, especially within the same species of the oaks, if they're close to each other, and when they start growing, their roots get connected, and the majority spread actually happens below ground. So this is from the New York Times headlines from 1950s. Like there's no digital version, obviously. It says oak wilt defined diseases as serious. Even then, they recognized once the tree gets affected, they don't recover, they usually die, but not widespread threat. But then fast forward, this is the map, the picture from the article came out 2020. So pretty much a lot of the parts of the Eastern United States now have the confirmed oak wilt disease. It's actually, I think, official confirmation was very first in Wisconsin here. The yellow has been the range, I think, known before 2018. The red and darker red colors are relatively new. You can see here's the borders, the Michigan and Wisconsin, we have border in Canada. And actually since 1980s, there was, Canada didn't have, at least they didn't see any confirmed case. And just last year, Canada also had the very first confirmed oak wilt. So it crosses the boundaries as any disease does. I think the first interest I got about the disease was like so we're going to look at two main oak group families, the red and white oaks, which are majority mainly in the Northern America. despite there being very biologically distinct features, they always seem to coexist, but they do respond to this disease again very differently. So for red oak family, whether it's northern red, pin, or black oaks, this is very deadly. It kills it within the weeks. For the white oaks, it turns out the white oaks have this interesting biological feature, but it can locally block the disease, so it can actually live for years without dying. Sometimes there were cases, maybe they might have even recovered. There were sort of experiments. So this was, I think, my main interest. Can we give some theoretical framework to explaining this phenomena? And so we started thinking about the modeling. I mean, another motivation was I will introduce one paper which did some modeling work, but there's not much, at least in published literature, modeling of the oak wilt disease. And I spent a number of months doing the individual-based models, which agent-based models, it's a simulation models. And I thought, well, this is lots of things are happening here, different kind of so that could capture really complex interactions. Then there's always SAR, very fundamental epidemiology models, even though it's simplistic view. Then I ended up really having to deal with that scarce data, trying to estimate the parameters. If I'm going to do some ecologically meaningful work, I could just explore the parameter range, but I didn't really have a way to estimate uncertainty. Then SIR models, we know it's conceptually simplistic, and a lot of work has been done. So I ended up thinking, okay, what is the proposed research focus so I can decide on the modeling? So the primary question I was interested, how does the relative abundance of white to red oak species influence disease dynamics? And it's just intuitively, I think you can say, well, if I have this mixed forest with white and red oaks, obviously more white oaks are gonna have a less than mortality, less disease spread, since the red oaks are so susceptible, and there's a major actually spreaders, because the fungal mats usually happen under the bark of the red oaks mostly. So we said, can we show negative correlation between white oak ratio and total mortality? Once they get disease, they usually die without relying on parameter estimations. Here comes that all math background. And it seemed like SAR models, but I'm going to talk a little bit why we came to this research question. Some empirical evidence, this is the adapted table from the experimental studies on the control of oak wilt disease. And if you look at this, only the last two rows are white oak group, and the very last column here is the percentage of dead from 53 to 60. Even the initial composition of the trees were almost 50 to 50, it says 48% for the white oak group. The dead trees at the end were only 5% of the white oaks were dead, almost 95% for the red oak. So it's like there is an empirical basis. What we're trying to say is the mortality is going to be negatively correlated to the ratio of the white oaks. And there is, I think, the only model which looked at the species composition. They did the stochastic simulation model. And you can see on the picture, this is a proportion of red oaks. The higher proportion of red oaks are going to lead to higher mortality. So based on that, we felt like, let's just start with a very simple SIR model. Let's assign all this transmission pathways. The top ones, we have compartments of the subsections, susceptible red, infected, and dead trees. The same thing for white oaks. There is a beetle transmission between infected red and the white, and also root-to-root transmission between red. We're, based on the biological knowledge, we're saying root-to-root transmission between white oaks is possible, but it's so rare, we're saying it's negligible for the simple model. There is no case of the root-to-root transmission between white and red oak, so that's also not. So we're translating all that to, I guess I have to be mindful about the time now. I feel like, So we're translating this to the parameter and the differential equation systems, that transmission rate among red oaks, BRR. So we're looking at the red oak, white oak dynamics, mortality rates. What the model assumptions, like sort of simplified homogeneous mixing within the forest. We're saying, well, let's not look at recovery and recruitment since it takes so long for these trees. And maybe we're just looking at 10-year span or something. And we know that red oaks have higher transmission and mortality rates, where the white oaks have lower susceptibility and mortality. And we actually not relying on any parameter estimations. We prove analytically based on ecologically meaningful and validated assumptions that infection rate is negatively correlated. Negatively correlated to the proportion of white oaks, or you could think the opposite. The higher the red oaks are going to be, the infection rate is going to be the higher. And it only based on these two assumptions where we're saying root-to-root transmission is higher than the beetles for the white and the beetles for the red, which have been confirmed by this experimental studies. And the same thing we prove analytically for the total mortality. And the only assumption we're using here is the proportion of red oaks being very close to 1, which is confirmed by the table and experimental studies. And the white oaks have partial resistance, so their mortality is very close. Even from the table, we saw that it's about 5%, whereas for red oaks, it's about 95%. Based on these assumptions, we were just analytically proved that mortality is negatively correlated to proportion of white oaks, which is sort of intuitive. That model kind of gives a mathematical language to what we know about it. And this is sort of visualization. Again, the parameters are not estimated by empirical data. It's more of like showing, and this could look different depending what scenario and what parameter estimations you have. And we're just using here the relationship. Again, this is on the right is a picture from the Menges model, which is sort of complicated simulation stochastic model, and a very simple SAR model could give the similar qualitative behavior, and we didn't need any parameter estimations to show that. I'm not going to talk about the extended model. What the ecological interpretation would be: promoting white oaks disrupts the network because that's a major disease spread is happening through the connected roots, and reduce the potential for disease spread. And sort of, we think, aligns with the concept of biodiversity, enhancing the ecosystem resilience. But when it comes to forest management, I was very, like, you cannot just go ahead and say, like, no, now you need to start planting the white oaks and maybe getting rid of, and they probably interact in so many different ways. But I actually found a study, there's an ongoing study in Wisconsin as part of the climate adaptation theories, which called oak wilt site restoration. So I think based on indigenous knowledge, they were able to, they're actually doing a study. They got rid of all the dead trees, and you can see this bur oak, which is the white oak group seedlings. So it will be interesting to just see how the study goes. It sort of aligns with all the empirical studies despite its simplicity. What we know from ecology, Wilson says mixed stands with more white oaks have lower disease incidence. I feel like it just gives mathematical language to it. Just there's a conclusion, and I'm gonna, we developed a mathematical model. We actually then developed an extended model. We talked about reproduction number in terms of proportion of white and red oaks. I think we do hope the study contributes to theoretical ecology and practical forest management strategies. And it's sort of a piece of a puzzle. It's not like really this is what you should do. It's like maybe gives a little bit insight when they're thinking about these management strategies. And I hope I didn't go over time for too long.
Thank you for your talk. If everyone will thank our speaker. I know it's always awkward on Zoom, but thank you for a very interesting talk. I'll go ahead and stop the recording